And we're live. It is Monday, July the 7th, the year of our Lord 2025. And folks, I've got a big announcement for you about the 7th of July. According to UN General Assembly Resolution 78312, it is World Kiswahili Language Day. And I know what you're asking. You're asking, what is Kiswahili language? I've heard of Swahili, but what is Kiswahili? And the answer, it seems, is that Kiswahili is just Swahili. Now, if we had Holly Berkley Fletcher here, we could get a discourse on whether there's a difference, but I don't think there is. And Kiswahili is, according to the United Nations General Assembly, the 7th of July each year honors Kiswahili as one of the most widely spoken languages in Africa and the world, with over, by which they mean more than, 200 million speakers. It is a vital tool of communication and integration across East, Central, and Southern Africa, and serves as an official language of the African Union, the SADC, and the EAC. Kiswahili is more than a language. It is a vessel of African identity, unity, and culture. And it has a rich, complex history shaped by various cultures and languages over the centuries. Its origins are debated, etc. And so, happy World Kiswahili Day to all who celebrate. No, that came out wrong. I didn't mean separate, I meant celebrate. And particularly to the estimable Holly Berkley Fletcher, wherever she may be. She may join sometime in the next hour to celebrate World Kiswahili Language Day with us, but she may not. Folks, you may have seen something this weekend suggesting that I had an unpleasant interaction with the U.S. National Park Police. And you may have seen last night's dog shirt where I said I'm not really going to talk about that just yet. And so I'm going to reiterate that. I am not going to talk about that just yet because there are some matters that flow out of whatever may or may not have happened that need to be resolved. I am fine. And as soon as I am at liberty to talk about it, I will talk about it in all the gory details, some of which are hilarious. And you will be the first to know. Until then, I am going to do what any good lawyer would tell me to do, which is to shut up and not talk about it. And I will only say this. I cheerfully accept whatever sanction may be available for my, or may be imposed upon me for my support for Ukrainian air defenses. I have long understood that in some country or other, my activities might inspire law enforcement action, and I have never had a problem with that. I will say my favorite interactions with police do not involve 10 cop cars showing up, streaming over lawns to respond to laser projections. They are more like what happened in Alicia's capital, where I had a very pleasant interaction with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who didn't berate me. So I'm not saying I'm happy about what happened, but I'm fine. Don't worry about it. All of which is a long way of saying that we are not allowed to have fun anymore, but that the sun is sort of shining, the birds are chirping. It's going to be a great freaking day, and you are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a goddamn revolution in morning television, because where else can you sign in the morning or watch it later and see a vague allusion um, to some police action and all its drama without, uh, uh, you know, uh, with the promise of more directed at the host, with the co host sitting there in a stand up for Ukraine shirt and thereby offering quiet and silent support. Nowhere else. That's not going to happen on the CBC morning show or on Joe and Mika or on Fox and Friends. Where else can you get a report from Alicia's long vacation in Sweden? Um,
Was on a tour.
yeah, where else can you find out about the actual European launch of the information animal by an information animal herself? And where else can you confront the question, can an information animal be the beast of the day? Um, Alicia, welcome back to the Western Hemisphere. Where have you been?
I was in Oslo and Berlin and Brussels, Stockholm, and then Visby in Gotland. There was a little bit of a rest at the end of 8 events in less than 2 weeks.
Yeah, so talk about. So my impression was that the first half of the trip was kind of like book launch events. The second half was like chilling out in Sweden. Is that rough division accurate?
First two-thirds events, and the last week, the last third was some rest.
Gotcha.
But
So
we ended up in Gotland at the same time as this annual political circus that happens in Sweden, uh, which is
what
basically all,
counts as a political circus in Sweden?
well,
Is it like
it's
everybody gets together and says responsible things quietly?
no, and I've got to look this up now because I wasn't planning on talking about it, but here we are. Every year, and it's been going on since I don't know, the 60s, I think, in Almedalen Park. There is this basically everybody comes by. It's an annual event that is an important meeting place, it says on Wikipedia, for everyone involved in Swedish politics. During the week, which takes place the 27th week of the year, Swedes go by weeks of year. I also don't think they really know what the weeks of the year are, but they say it. So everything is numbered by one of 52 weeks a year. Representatives from major political parties in Sweden take turns giving speeches in the park. This has been going on for a very long time. But what's weird about it, to me anyway, given where we sit in North America, is that senior public officials and politicians are just walking around and normal people can come up and talk to them. Normal people, whoever could have afforded to get to Gotland, which is an island off of Sweden. But I do find it very democratic. It's a little crazy because it overtakes this small medieval city of Visby. And it started with Olaf Palme originally.
Who
And then,
somebody eventually just walked up to on the street and shot to death. You'd think the
right.
Swedes might have learned their lesson about letting random people just walk up to politicians in the street.
Yes, and tragically, there was somebody stabbed last year who died. So there was increased security. But basically, anybody can just show up. Anybody can show up in the town. You have to register to be able to go to the events. It feels like it's been taken over a little bit by PR industry and stuff. There's Holly, but it was cool. It was weird. It was cool. I'd never seen anything like it before.
Hey, I'm just calling to say hi and to tell you more about our adventures here. How are you, Alicia? Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
No? Oh, you can. Okay. I don't have very good internet here. So,
Where are you?
um, I'm in Masai Mara. And
Oh, very
Ben, I
cool.
can't hear you. I think you're muted.
It's because I was muted. Holly, there's
Ben,
something there's something we desperately need to talk to you about.
that's what I saw your message. That's why I came on. So,
Yeah, so
but also I have a story for you.
okay, so we're gonna do this in order. And so here is the question raised by uh the UN General Assembly Resolution 7832 declaring July 7th to be World Kiswahili Language Day. And the
Really?
question that everybody wants to know this morning, and that I have been deluged with queries about for Holly, is what is the difference between Swahili and Kiswahili? And why did the UN choose to designate this Kiswahili Language Day rather than Swahili Language Day? Is that just an effort to be obscure, or is there a reasonable explanation for it?
There is Swahili is like the English word for Swahili. If you're talking about Swahili in Swahili, it's Kiswahili.
I see.
Yeah.
Um, so here's my question. If you're writing about it in English on the UN General Assembly webpage, is it pretentious to call it Kiswahili Language Day? Or because you're actually writing in English and the word for in English is Swahili? Or conversely, is it just respectful? Because like if you were writing the you know International French Language Day in English, you probably wouldn't say International Francais Language Day. You'd probably just say French, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I would say Swahili because a lot of people then get confused if you say Kiswahili. But I don't know. It's ambiguous. I think they're
All
trying
right.
to
So
be respectful.
how do you celebrate International Kiswahili Language Day?
Well, I'm trying to speak Swahili while I'm here. So, um,
I
yeah.
I only know two words in Swahili.
What is that? Don't
Well,
say
I know
jumbo. Don't say
Kiswahili
jumbo.
and
Yeah.
Shagala Bagala.
Bagala. Shagala. Let me tell you, speaking of Shagala Bagala, we've had some on this trip. Um, the last, over the last 2 days, our two vehicles have had four flats, which I have never, I don't even know. I think, I don't even, that must be some sort of Guinness Book of World Records thing. Like I've had only, in all my safaris, I've only had like one flat in all of my times. And over the past 2 days, we have had four flats, and it has been. And then yesterday, we got in because we were delayed leaving the other place, and because of the flats. And then there was a deluge here in Masai Mara, which is supposed to be dry season, but because of climate change, the weather has become very unpredictable. And so there was like a deluge here, and like we drove through a body of water that we should not have driven through, but nonetheless, we survived. And we had some other mishaps. Anyway, yesterday was like my worst day that I've ever had in this country in over 40 years. So
Since the
everyone's
jigger.
frozen. So anyway, that's my story. I don't have very good internet, so I'm just gonna leave and say
All
goodbye.
right. Well,
But
Holly is
yeah,
breaking up badly.
I don't. Anyway, I'm gonna leave
Holly is
because
breaking up badly for me. And
yeah.
and so I am going to take the prerogative of
No,
muting
I'm.
her and waving goodbye. Um, and we are shocked to welcome Jonathan Rauch, who is still not a Mormon woman for all his efforts. And uh, Jonathan, it's a delightful surprise to see you.
Well, I I called to find out what everyone's doing for International Swahili Day.
That's
That's
Kiswahili to you.
Kiswahili Day. That's been very much on my mind. But also because, well, I'm always happy to be here, of course, but particularly to find out what happened between the forces of the Great Projector and the National Park Service, which were alluded to in your email last night. I
Yes.
figured I could get that intel here if even if it's not yet available for public consumption.
Well, since this is rather public, I'm going to be reticent about it. But I will say that those who were watching a live stream on Saturday evening will have seen efforts on my part to project uh, pro-Ukrainian armament messages and will have seen a confrontation with National Park Service police as a result that was, shall we say, more aggressive than I have experienced from any police force uh, prior, and there is some ongoing fallout from that that I need to deal with, for which reasons I am going to keep my own counsel further.
So you cannot say more about the details of what took place, even though it was all live cast.
It was not all live cast, and I believe, but I'm not sure, that the results of it were not. And uh, yeah, I am just being careful. And I will have a lot more to say about it in lurid detail. And by the way, there are some details that are uh, hilarious. Um, and but I will say, A, nobody was hurt. B, nobody was arrested. C, all um, uh, the only casualties may or may not be Lord and Lady Laser and some very good camera equipment. And I fully intend to make as much noise about it as I can and use it to draw attention to the subject on Alicia's shirt, and B, to use it to produce as much amusing content as I can. Because what is civil disobedience for, if not to amuse onlookers? And I will just say, with Ralph Waldo Emerson, all actual states are corrupt. Good men must not obey laws too well.
Well, I am very curious to hear details. Hopefully, you can do that fairly soon. Is there a place I can go to watch the footage?
No, the footage is not published. It was live, but as a prudential matter, I have not released it yet. But I will.
And is there more than one point of view of footage? In other words, multiple cameras that eventually we will be able to see?
Um, Not to my knowledge. To my knowledge, the only live stream of it was. There are, I think, a lot of people probably took pictures because it was pretty dramatic. Um, uh, and but uh, um, I would just refer you to that scene in The Usual Suspects, where at the very beginning, the NYPD comes to arrest Todd Hockney, and he's there like this, and there are like 10 of them, and he says, "You sure you brought enough guys?" That's That's I think the best illustration. No, I mean, look, I'm making light of it, but the honest truth is that nothing like this has ever happened before. And as you know, these are things I have done multiple times in multiple countries, in multiple jurisdictions within, subject to multiple police forces. And nobody has ever done more than said, you need to stop that. And I have always complied with that, and so I would be lying if I didn't say this was something in a whole different scale.
I'll stop asking for details because I know you don't want to give them. But one thing which I would guess is already known in public is the approximate number of people who were there with you projecting that night. In other words, people who witnessed whatever it was that happened.
Uh, the field on the mall or on the mount of the monument was crowded. There were lots of people there.
In meaning the group that was there with you, or meaning anyone who happened to be there at the moment, or is that not a detail that we should get into?
Um, I don't want to talk about how many people were there with me.
Okay.
One other person was detained with me. But I don't want to talk about who else may have been involved.
Right, got it.
We,
I only ask because I'm curious about the number of potential witnesses and the amount we may be hearing about this, as well as the scale in which whatever happened took place. So,
as I say, I will have a great deal more to say about this. I am going to wait until I have a firmer sense of um, uh, what what is what is in my best interests.
understood.
But I will say this. Um, I apologize to nobody. I ask for nobody's forgiveness. Somebody needs to bring um, the Ukrainian air defense situation to the in as loud a fashion as possible um, to and put it on the top of the agenda. And I am not remotely shy about um, doing that in peaceful fashions that um, you know may run up in some tension with some obscure reg.
Well, there are a couple things that I would ask about if Alicia was interested or wanted to continue to yield the floor. One is
I'm
actually
fine. But I want to ask you something really trivial when I can.
go for it. I have two very non-trivial things that I could mention if
Go with your
desired.
non-trivial, and then I'll move it to trivial to lighten the air.
Well, my first non-trivial thing is, in fact, the situation in Ukraine, as you understand it, in the wake of the administration's crimping of the hose for whatever reason. I've heard mixed things about that. One of the things I've heard is actually they're in pretty good shape for enough of what they need to continue the war effort as long as they get anti-aircraft equipment and intel. The second thing that I wanted to ask about is the court. I listened to a very interesting interview that Bill Crystal did with, now the name will flee my mind. Maybe you heard it, Ben.
Ryan Evans.
Ri-
Uh, sorry,
no,
Ryan Goodman.
Ryan Goodman.
Ryan
Yeah.
Evans is the editor of War on the Rocks. Ryan Goodman is the editor of
Um,
Just Security.
whose point of view? I suppose if we only have time for one of these topics, it would be this one. But both are interesting. Mr. or Professor Goodman's viewpoint, I will summarize rather crudely as the conservatives on the court, in response to the various Trump-related, administration-related cases before them, are ruling from a point of view which would be legitimate if you're writing for the ages, imagining the balance of powers 100 years from now and how you would sort it all out from their point of view, but writing in a way that's very unappropriate to the current crisis, in which you have a very bad actor loose on the landscape and they're turning a blind eye to it. And that's an interesting question, because I know serious legal analysts who are very alarmed by the current situation, who think nonetheless the court should stay in its traditional lane. It should not go in irregular directions in response to an irregular president. Anyway, I wanted your sense of all that. Those are my two topics, if anyone is interested. Over to Alicia for trivia.
No, it wasn't trivia. It's a trivial question. Ben, back on the courts.
All right. So first of all, let's deal with the Ukraine military situation. I tend to agree with that assessment, that it is not clear to me at all that Russia is making substantial progress. It's making very incremental progress along a very long front, at the cost of unbelievable casualties. And I mean, sort of casualties like we have not seen since, at least since the Iran-Iraq War, maybe since Korea. I mean, it is a really dramatic loss of human male young life. And I don't know over what time frame that burns itself out, but I don't think there's any evidence that Russia is in a position to take Ukraine or to make a dramatic breakthrough. What it is in a position to do is kill an enormous number of civilians in Ukrainian cities. And the what Russia took apparently from the quasi-announcement of a freeze in air defense systems for Ukraine, was that the more missiles and drones you send to Kyiv and to other Ukrainian cities, the faster you will deplete their interceptors and the more civilians you will kill. And that puts pressure on the Ukrainian government, not for military reasons, but for civilian protection reasons. And so they have done that. And since, I mean, they were already hitting Ukrainian cities very hard. And in response to the administration's announcement, or let me say it more neutrally, following the administration's announcement, they have upped the game, which is, by the way, exactly what, if I'd said to you, how would Putin react to this, you would have said, well, he'd send more missiles over, right? It's not like, deep military strategy here. The Ukrainians are running low on interceptors. We've said we're not providing it. Let's make them use up their interceptors. Now, for those of you who have, joined us when Nastya joins on the show, sometimes, she's very cheerful about it, but, they're not sleeping, right? They're dragging themselves into shelters night after night after night with small children. And by the way, Ukrainians who don't happen to live next to the sort of posh shelter that Nastya lives right near, go down into the subways, right, and sleep in the subways. You do that night after night after night. It's really exhausting. And, there's a joke in Kyiv. We have a very flexible work-life balance. If we don't get killed, we come to work. If we do get killed, we don't. And There's a lot of humor like that, but it really is grueling. And, it's war crime after war crime after war crime. So that's the Ukrainian situation. My concern is not that the front is going to collapse imminently. My concern is that, a lot of civilians are going to be terrorized daily, weekly, monthly. And I just think, you know, I don't know, it's a ridiculous thing to say about Donald Trump, but we should be better than that. It's not a deep analytical insight. Um, as to the court, look, I basically, um, the question of whether the court should be responsive to the moment or whether it should always stay within its lane is one of those deep metaphysical questions about the Supreme Court that, you know, there's no real right answer to, right? It's a question of mood and affect and like what you believe about the Supreme Court. Is the Supreme Court's job to rise to the moment and in a kind of militant democracy way, as big as the democratic threat is, that the Supreme Court needs to calibrate its response to that. That is, Ketanji Brown Jackson's clear view. It is some of the others, less stated view, but it is not, and predictably so, not the view of, people who are, to one degree or another, textualist, originalist type, but in all sense formalists, right? And a formalist is not going to sign on to that view. And you saw this in the exchange between Amy Coney Barrett and Ketanji Brown Jackson the other day, where, Ketanji Brown Jackson says, wait a minute, you're just letting them do wildly illegal stuff. And Amy Coney Barrett responded, you don't respond to illegality in the executive by illegality in the courts. Right. And there's no way to resolve that dispute. That's just that's just code word for, I mean, it's almost like the exchange between Tom Paine and Edmund Burke, right? Like radicalism of one side, you don't respond to it with radicalism. You don't respond to injustice with radicalism, or maybe you do, right? And I think that's just something you either believe or, people, you plant a kind of epistemic pole on that and you kind of live with the consequences of it. But I don't think it's a resolvable dispute. What I fault the court for is not that posture exactly. It is I don't understand how even within their posture you can tolerate what they tolerated in the DVD case, where they basically said, we're going to, defer to the executive on the deportation of these people to South Sudan, irrespective of the fact that the executive branch has been lying to the court underneath for the last several weeks. And that just strikes me as, at some point, ostrich with head in the sand and not really consistent even with the general posture of not doing more than is in your lane. So this is a weeks long conversation, but I think that's the outlines of my feelings about it. You're muted.
Thank you. Would you say that pretty much all of what the court has done until DVD has been consistent with a formalistic judicial philosophy? Or would you say, as it seems like Justice Jackson is implying, no, they're really not on the level. They're trying to find ways to accommodate or at least not confront the president. And if the shoe were on the other foot, they'd be taking a very different tack.
I would say there are elements of both. The one that I can't understand and explain is DVD, partly because the court didn't try to explain it itself, right? There's no opinion. There's no explanation of their view of the matter. And so you kind of have to make it up for them. And I think that's indefensible. But the on the other side of the coin, um, I do think a lot of it is very predictable based on actual judicial philosophy. And if Ryan and I had sat down and you had described the facts of a lot of these cases, a fair bit of it you would have reasonably predicted based on stated judicial philosophy. There are some exceptions. And by the way, the exceptions cut maybe both ways. So I would not have predicted that 9 justices get together and issue a universal injunction that says everybody gets due process under the Alien Enemies Act. We're not, you know, figure it out, right? I would maybe have said 6 justices would say that, but like the court was pretty strong on that. And but conversely, and in the other direction, I'm not sure I would have predicted, um, you know, the the consistency with which they say, "Hey, you know, you can deal with this stuff in the Court of Federal Claims later. So we're going to close our eyes to the fact that federal agencies are being dismantled." So I think it's a complex picture, but I did react to DVD very much the way Ketanji Brown Jackson did, which is, you know, this is not on the level. Um, I don't care what your judicial philosophy is. The executive branch is lying to the courts in this case, and you're treating it like a normal situation. I don't understand that.
In DVD, the unsigned opinion, do they, do we know which justices and how many?
Well, we know that there were 6 of them who didn't object to it publicly. It's possible that one of them dissented privately, but I think
There's no public, 8190, anything like that.
no.
That's
There's
unusual.
merely a who dissented, who noticed an action. That's the way the emergency docket works. All right, we are going to go back to Alicia first with a trivial matter or a trivial question, and then back to 2 weeks or a full month in Europe and a book launch and all kinds of stuff.
That's boring. And my question is so sadly trivial. What I really want to know is how does Jonathan store his shirts? Because your shirt and my shirt are wrinkly and his is not, and I need the secret.
Uh, the secret is to buy yourself a an LED light that mounts directly above your camera on the computer so that there's no side light to show the many, many wrinkles in your shirt.
This brings me to an important trivial question, which is I heard on some podcast that I listened to about the most extreme, this was framed as the most extreme eccentricity. Um, and the eccentricity was that a certain gentleman never washes his underwear. He merely buys more underwear. Um, and and I thought this was, you know, the sort of disposable plate, disposable cutlery approach to underwear was genuinely peculiar. And I thought I would raise it as a do we think that just one use underwear, I mean, is that simply wasteful or is there anything to be said about it?
It's wasteful.
What do you think, Jonathan?
I think that the more sensible approach, and the one I take, is to buy only one pair of underwear
and wash it constantly.
No, no, why wash it? You mean you hadn't noticed all those staff meetings?
That's the right answer, folks.
I was just going to say, unless it depends, it really shouldn't be thrown away after one use. Well,
All
that's a
right.
Monday.
I just want to note she's been in Oslo and she's adopted the Edvard Munch pose. Um, Alicia, we were talking about your sojourn in Swedish politics.
I mean, sojourn. I just walked amongst Swedish politicians and high-level bureaucrats. So I didn't actually engage with them. Not
How good
speaking
is
Swedish and all.
how good is your Swedish these days? You
It's
sometimes text me in Swedish.
that's the extent of my Swedish.
Right. Good. I one thing I love about Swedish is you can almost always decode um, short Swedish messages with a very small vocabulary because an enormous number of the grammar tracks English grammar pretty precisely, it being, you know, a pretty close to English. And the vocabulary is either long and incomprehensible or readily comprehensible. And so you can, when Alicia texts me in Swedish, I can almost always decode it. Whereas when Minna texts me in Finnish, you don't have a chance.
Finnish is Finno-Ugric. It's not even Indo-European. Of course, we have no chance.
Right, but Hebrew is
Swedish,
not Indo-European either. And if somebody texts me in Hebrew, I can handle it. But
because you know the alphabet and you know how to read it.
I know the Finnish alphabet.
Well,
But like Finnish is hard in a way that no other language I have ever been exposed to is hard.
huomenta, terve.
Yep.
That's all
Um,
I've got this morning.
all right. So tell us about the book launch.
But I mean, there were several events, great hosts. That's really a lot.
You're really doing a sales job here.
I've decided that my sales approach is basically reverse psychology.
Right. You really don't want to read this book. I
Don't
mean,
read it. It's super boring,
it's
very
it's
expensive.
only for people who are really serious about this subject, and I just don't think you're up for it.
It's very theoretical. There's like three theoretical chapters. I was
And it's
pleased
super
because
historical. I mean, you have to be really interested in Charles the First and the Peloponnesian War, and it's just not for you. I mean,
and how I had to weave in Charles Dickens, and our librarian at work had to go and track down some obscure letter that I couldn't find that supposedly he wrote. Yeah, exactly. I was happy though because so Carnegie. I mean, I'm feeling much love for my institution. Has offices in different places in the world, and so our exfiltrated team from Moscow that was made illegal reconstituted in Berlin, and they have an amazing office thanks to a Stiftung that gave them some space, and it overlooks the Brandenburg Gate, which is pretty cool. But what I was
and
happy
which has
about,
a great view on Russian embassies that you might want to project on.
it's very near. I think it faces the opposite way than that, but very close, right? And but my colleague paid me a compliment, which was to say that he thought the book was going to be something else entirely, that it was just going to be saying how we should and can ban bad users from social media, and it was very much not this.
Well, that's a really interesting comment about this is going to get real meta, but about the expectation of the information environment in this information environment, right? So, in the information environment that we live in, if you tell an information animal a sophisticated think tanky information animal, I have a new book coming out about our information environment. The information animal assumes that the uh, said book will be why we should ban people I don't like from social media.
But this is the priming factor, right? Like this is okay. I have an entire chapter to bore everybody on definitions around information. And one of the there's a philosophical debate in the philosophy of information crowd. And one side says that information is inherently true. It's inherently truthful. And the other side says, no, that's not the case. And I mean, I would argue that it is not because we all process information based on like our
What do
paradigms,
you mean
what we already
information is
understand.
inherently true? Do you mean it's not information if it's not true?
So the thinking goes in this line of thought, that it can't possibly be information if it is not truthful. There it is something else, that it is perhaps disinformation or misinformation or whatever the heck you want to call it. What I find fascinating about this is that it totally seems to neglect the perspective of the human processing the information and how their worldview, their understanding, the way they already think may alter how they process information, even if it is truthful, in a way that no longer carries the same meaning that was intended.
Yeah, I gotta say, I mean, I can see that argument vis-a-vis facts, right? That there's no such thing as a false fact. There are facts which are true, and then there is something else, which is a statement of fact that isn't true. You could call it falsity or right, but information is just anything that can be coded with a one and a zero.
Ooh, well, that's a very computer science approach to the concept of information. I think that there are other disciplines, namely biology, that may take issue with that. But as you
But
know from the book,
what counts as information in biology that can't be expressed um, in a Turing-esque binary?
so all of our kind of information processing in DNA or unconscious responses, like a startle response in babies, would just be reduced to a binary equation. We're just mathematical beings.
Well, so I don't know if we are just mathematical beings, but I would say the informational component of us, when your hand goes like that involuntarily, that can certainly be reduced to uh, to expression in binary.
I
Um,
mean, I'm not a mathematician, so I'm not going to be able to say at, 8:48 on a Monday morning, completely unprepared for this talk, whether we are just we could be reduced to this. I think it feels it feels wrong, but that doesn't necessarily make it fact.
I mean, I think I like my applied math is not especially strong, but my impression was that this is like the foundational Alan Turing proof was that you could express essentially all information in as instructions in binary code, and that's what led to the computer revolution. Um, I'd be interested in what like the category of information that cannot be expressed as ones and zeros is. Maybe feelings, but I'm not sure that's information. That strikes me as
I think actually there are probably social cues, but again, I like this is kind of we're really swimming far outside of our like our lanes here. Neither you nor I are going to be able to answer this based on our backgrounds. Like possibly, what if it is feelings? I mean, we do as social creatures, we do get information from how other people are feeling or how they might express something through their reactions. But again, somebody might say this could all be reduced to ones and zeros. I kind of worry a little bit about that thinking from a humanities perspective because it's also kind of that very tech focused, scientific focused approach that I think strips us of our humanity and maybe negates some of the more messy aspects of what being human is. But that could just be my anti-tech feeling sentiments of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I am not asserting it. I'm posing it um as a I have trouble thinking of information that is not reducible to ones and zeros, but you know, maybe but I'm certainly open to the possibility that there is. Um, Alicia, I have a very important subject that we have not talked about since you ran off to Europe, and that is
Is it a lane I can swim in?
uh, Canadian politics. Yeah, yeah. It seems to me like um, a lot of things in Canada have kind of settled down over the last um, few weeks. That um, there's a like there's not a whole lot of anger right now directed south, justified though that would be. That seems to have calmed down a bit. There's not a, you know, Mark Carney is managing the U.S. relationship seemingly quite adeptly, in my view. And so I'm curious whether my sense that things are better, even the last round of Trump saying moronic things about Canada being the 51st state, didn't generate the kind of outrage that it did. And I don't take that to be because people accept it now. I take it to be because, um, you know, people kind of understand that, you know, indulging the abuse by being outraged by it is, you know, not necessarily the most effective way to handle it. I'm curious your sense of it. What's the current level of anxiety and irritation and anger?
Well, that's kind of challenging because I've only been home for a week and it was Canada Day, so I think that people were focused on having a long weekend. Also, I would posit that Canadians in many parts of the country have had some other challenges to deal with, like one of our worst forest fire seasons. Um, for example, there's a town out west that was destroyed a couple of years ago and now is again threatened to be destroyed by fires. So one is that there may just be a shift over concerns of things that we have to worry about. Second, I think there was quite a bit of media coverage over the whole getting rid of the digital services tax that had been implemented by the past Liberal government. And I don't think that the tax was popular or unpopular. It might have been a little bit stupid in that it retroactively charged digital services for the profits that they made in Canada, and that probably wasn't a great idea. I also don't think that Canadians really care if digital services got taxed on their profits in the country. I think that will probably get support at this point. I'm not sure that it's going down so well that you have people in the Trump administration talking about Carney caving and Canada caving into Trump to give him that. So I don't know how the optics of that are going to play out. At the same time, if I had to guess, or at least speaking as myself as a Canadian, I think there's a point in time where we just don't even take anything that they say with much face value or belief that it's true or that it has any meaning. And then the third thing that's going on is the leader of the opposition, who probably would be the most vocal on attacking Carney, has just had the announcement that the by-election has started that he's running in. So I think that's kind of playing out, and there's some watching whether he'll win. Of course, he's going to win. There's been jokes that a Cedar Rail could win in that riding for the Conservatives. So I think that, coupled with the summer break, all of these things happening, we may just be in a point of like bated breath waiting to see what happens. Of course, there's also the deadlines looming. So didn't Trump say something about July 7th? There was some projection from Canada too
Yeah,
in terms
today
of when
was
it would
the
strike a
day.
deal. Yeah.
What do
Some of
you
it could
think?
just be we're tired of reacting.
Hmm. What do you think, Jonathan? Have we all been overreacting, and July 7th is this is now the week, in addition to Kiswahili International Day, is the week that the Trump administration's going to, having brought peace to the Middle East, and is going to show that the United States can have uh, peaceful trade relations with all of our partners based on the principle that fuck you.
Well, first I should say to Alicia and any Canadians in the Greek chorus that I just last month visited Canada and repeatedly felt the need to apologize for my country, um, or at least the president of my country, but also, frankly, for my country, which has allowed this to happen and in many ways made it happen. And I got back nothing but graciousness and assurances that there was no need for apologies, and life was going on a person-to-person basis as it always has, which I thought was a hopeful thing. Second to, as you would say, Ben, foot stomp Alicia's second point. Yuval Levin is fond of saying that Trump is not a strong president, he's a very weak one. And he makes up in bluster and executive orders the real absence of authority that he has, the extreme narrowness of his margins, the fact that he has never been able to muster a real popular majority. At the moment, there's the fact that he's governing against his mandate. None of this, very little of it, is what people thought they were getting. And I think what the world has figured out is that the guy's a pufferfish. Now, that doesn't mean he's helpless. It doesn't mean he can't cause all kinds of trouble today and every day. He does, and he will. It's just, I think people are starting to stand down and stop panicking and realizing that, in fact, he is a weak president. And that has all kinds of ramifications. And by the way, I think he's getting weaker by the week.
And what is the evidence of that? I mean, it obviously warms my heart. But if I were a skeptic, I would say, but Jonathan, he just rammed through and got uh, essentially all Republicans in both houses to vote for a bill that is plainly not in their interests to vote for. Um, it sounds, it seems like he's pretty strong if strength is marked by or defined by the ability to get people to do what you want.
The Republicans get one big bill. This is it. That's why it was a Christmas tree. He would have signed absolutely anything that had the Homeland Security budget increase, which I think Stephen Miller cares about. I think all the rest was stuff. As I say, I think he would have signed anything, and I don't think he gets much more than that in the next 2 years. You and I are going to write an article about what the Democrats should demand in exchange for the continuing resolution that's coming up not long from now, and I think we'll see a quite different dynamic. And one sign of weakness is that he's sinking in the polls, despite the operation in Iran, which went remarkably well. Doesn't seem to be helping him. Yet another interesting to me is he's not defying the courts. And I think that's because he senses he doesn't have the political strength to defy the courts, because I think he would if he could, or at least a lot of people in the administration would be saying, let's just get this over with. Could be wrong about this. And I'm not saying he's back in his cage. Presidents are capable of making all kinds of trouble, and this one will, and being weaker in many ways makes him more dangerous, not less.
We are going to leave it there. Alicia, welcome back. Jonathan, welcome back. In a different sense. To you all, happy World Kiswahili Day. Um, Bother your friends with whatever Swahili words you happen to know. In my case, shagala bagala. Um, and uh, and we are going to be back tomorrow. I don't know who the co-hosts are going to be. Maybe Jonathan, still not a Mormon woman, hasn't changed in the last hour, will be here. Maybe Alicia will be here. Maybe Nastya will be here. Maybe Scott Shapiro will show up. Who knows? I don't know who the guest is going to be. Maybe there will be one. Maybe there won't. But you'll be there, and I'll be here. Maybe I'll be in a position to talk a little bit more freely. We'll see you then.